right, hello everyone. Welcome to my talk, Wired to Learn with or Without AI. So, who is actually all hungry right now? Can I see some hands? Who is hungry? Okay, quite a few. Who is hungry for knowledge? Woo! Yes, and that's why we're all here, right? So thank you so much for coming, for staying with me during these lunch times. I really appreciate it. And in this talk, we will basically look at the question that I've been getting so much in the last 1.5 years, which is basically, is AI making us dumber? And should we actually use AI tools when it comes down to learning capabilities? So that is what we're going to look for. And we're going to do that in this program. First, we have a very short glossary. There's only one item on it, so it won't be long. And then we continuing to some AI tools, or what AI can do for us, some AI tools, the impact of AI on the learning capabilities, and how we balance the two. Do we balance our own human intelligence with AI? All right, let's dive into that glossary, because there's just one term which I would like to elaborate a bit on, and that is the jagged frontier. Now, the jagged frontier is a term, and there will be a bunch of other terms, of course, but I invite you to just use your own AI assistant or a good old-fashioned Google search to find that for yourself. So, what is a frontier? A frontier is a boundary between two areas. And it often refers to what is known and what is unknown. So often, the more difficult a task gets, the more likely you are to succeed in that task. It's a steady decrease of the frontier, right? However, if you use AI, that frontier is jagged. So that refers to the unpredictable and ever-changing limits of what AI can and cannot do. So if we as humans interpret two tasks as evenly difficult, then it can very well be that one of those tasks can be answered or done by the AI with ease, whereas the other one is an absolute nightmare. And I want you to remember that for this talk and after this talk, because you cannot simply trust that if you find a question or a task easy, that you can simply trust the answers of the AI, because that's a different ballgame. All right, with that being said, what can AI actually do for us? Well, first of all, research has shown that AI is brilliant in closing the gaps between a lower performance group and a higher performance group. Now, if you look at this research, the participants were asked to perform two types of tasks. One type of task was done without the use of AI, the green bar, and one with AI, the blue bar. Now, if after they all finished the tasks, the participants were divided based on scores in the bottom half of scores and the top half of scores. Now, if you look at the average of the green bars of the lower half and the bottom half, you see that the difference between the two is about 22% in average score. That's quite a big difference. Now, interestingly enough, that difference between the two groups shrank about 5 times to only 4% when they got to use AI. Well, that's a great benefit, right? So we see that AI is closing that gap. And if we look a bit further, you can actually see that the average score of the bottom half of scores actually increased with 43%, whereas the high performance group only grew with about 17%. So we can basically say that lower performing people are gaining more out of the use of AI. So that's great. That was my talk. We all see now, like, if you're learning new stuff, if you're a novice, if you're a junior, if you're lower performant, it's a great tool to use. Goodbye. No, right? Because the question is actually not only is it making us better performing, but it's also the question is it making us smarter also on the long term? Because this is all short term, right? All right, to answer that question, we're going to look at another research conducted in a time before AI. This research was done over the course of 11 years, and they looked at the impact of making homework on the exam scores later on. They divided a group of students into the type of students based on their homework type, and they had the copiers, the people or the students who looked up the answers to their homework questions online with Google back then, and the generators. And the generators were the people that didn't look up the answers online for the homework questions, but they used their own problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills in order to answer the questions. Well, if we zoom in a little bit to the totals, you can see that the copiers are flying high at the beginning of the semester, right? At the beginning of the course, even before they got their first classroom lesson, they actually scored on their homework a score of 81. That's super high. But that makes sense, right? Because they basically just searched for the answers online, copy-pasted it, and there's that. The generators, however, they didn't have any knowledge yet about the material, so they scored a lot lower. But as you can see, over time, the generators are slowly but steadily decreasing their score, and actually at the end of the course, they're gaining the highest score that they retrieved, meaning that they retained the information they were learning. Different from the copiers, who are actually ending lower than they started off with. And even though this research is conducted in a time before AI, we can already see the impact of copy-pasting from external sources and what it does to your retention, right? So we don't want to copy-paste answers. So how can we then use AI tools in our learning process? Well, we all know that we can use AI assistants to chat with, right? But a great benefit of participating in the course is that you get a tutor. And this tutor will help you plan for the entire duration of the course. It will give structure to your course, what you should learn first, how to build upon that, etc., etc. Well, AI is actually very good in that sense, in that matter. You can ask if you want to learn something, if AI can help you with to plan the material, to structurize the material, to break it down if it's too difficult, or build it up if it's too easy. And when you're learning, often you are getting a lot of input, right? Either through blogs or videos, etc., etc. Now, AI is also very good in summarizing that input. However, do mind, please not ask AI to summarize an article that you haven't read before. Because the devil's in the details, and in the details there will be hallucinations. So it can help you with getting some key takeaways, maybe some extra considerations, but you should not blindly trust it. You should first know what the article is about and then let it help you further. Now, who is using code generators in their IDE? All right, almost half, maybe a little bit less. Well, if it comes down to learning capabilities and your own personal learning path, I am not a big fan of automated code generators because it takes away the opportunity for you to learn yourself. So I would highly recommend to disable that functionality if you want, but I do really like the plugin in your IDE to simply help you explain the code or to simplify the code. Next to that, next to AI assist and code generators, you also have workspaces. And this is great when you're learning new, bigger concepts over the course of a longer duration of time. Can you put your agenda in there, the literature, the videos, the blogs, everything. And then later on, it can help you query and ask questions about that data. And you can even use it to generate podcasts. Now, this entire talk is built upon 9 scientific articles that came out in the last couple of years. And I thought it might be fun to generate a podcast for you. So if you scan the QR code and you want to listen to an AI-generated podcast on 9 articles, then you can, and maybe you can listen to it when you finish JCON and you drive back home. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is supporting tools. And one of the most important things when learning is that you use visualization during your learnings, because you activate different brain parts which it will help you to retain the information later on. Now, Napkin AI is one of those tools that can really help you with that. You can simply input your text, your summary, your literature, and Napkin AI will generate some visualizations for you out of that text. All right, so this is all nice and dandy, but what is actually the impact of AI on your learning capabilities? Let's do what all developers love most, a risk assessment. Nice. All right, the first risk I want to talk about is becoming over-reliant on AI, where users are simply copy-pasting the answers they found online, which could seriously harm your problem-solving skills, especially for juniors who haven't learned how to problem-solve themselves yet. Secondly, we all know that AI is built on gigantic masses of data coming from the internet, right? And we also know that the internet is full of bullshit facts, low-quality code, and biases. And those biases go further than only racial or gender, but it's also biased on IT solutions, simply because some IT solutions are more present on the internet than others are. So if you don't think that clouded judgment or low-quality code is already bad enough, then let me introduce you to a bigger risk, namely that if you take those falsehoods as being the truth, and you save those truths to your long-term memory, then those wrong assumptions will become the base for future learnings and future decisions. So be careful. And lastly, I want to talk with you about the illusion of understanding. It is very human-like that if something sounds valid and reasonable, that we accept it as the truth. And that is a risk for both seniors as it is for juniors. However, if you're a novice in a certain concept, even if you are aware of this risk, how are you going to evaluate if the AI is speaking the truth if you don't have any ground knowledge on the matter yet? And apart from that, a big risk is that you stop asking critical questions about the answers given by AI. And this could lead to a principle called falling asleep at the wheel. This is where you let AI take over instead of using it as a tool. And here you are not in control anymore, AI is. And this could seriously harm your learning path, your skill development, and even your productivity in the long run. So what would it look like in reality? Well, in the research they conducted at the beginning with the closing the gap, right? Those two types of tasks were all performed within the jagged frontier of the AI. So both tasks could be performed with ease by the AI. However, now they created this task deliberately that laid without the out of the jagged frontier. And they did that so that it would be complex, ambiguous, and that it would require a high level of human intuition and creativity in order to solve that question. And as you can see, in those cases, it's even undesirable to use AI. Because as you can see, the people who couldn't use AI scored a lot higher than the people who had access to AI. And that is funny, because the people who had access to AI, they also still had access to their own brains, right? They didn't lack anything that the group without AI did have. But this is where you see falling asleep at the wheel in action. It is so much harder to keep thinking critically in the same way you would do without AI. All right, but is AI really that flaky, you might ask? Well, OpenAI did conduct a research where they asked the different AI models to answer questions on academical topics. And as you can see, over the course of different AI models, the grades are increasing, especially on calculus and statistics. It is getting better and more reliant, but therefore it's also getting harder and harder to judge when the AI is speaking the truth and when it's not. So I think testing will become more and more important. We need to keep on thinking critically in order to understand the code and understand our acceptance criteria. We need it to develop our own critical thinking skills, but also to get out the errors and problems and bugs introduced by the AI. But where there are risks, there are also opportunities. One of the big opportunities there is with AI is that it's a big idea generator, right? And if you don't let AI take over, but you simply use it to reflect on your own process, on your own thinking, and you use it to gain new perspectives, instead of it hurting your critical thinking skills, it can now benefit your critical thinking skills. It can also really help you to personalize your learning. Multiple researchers have shown that student participation and motivation increases when they use AI. And do mind the influence of motivation on your learning. If you drop out either because of bore out or because it's too difficult, you are not learning anything. So this is also a big game changer in terms of people staying involved with the learning material. Then lastly, I want to talk about reduced cognitive load. Because if you're learning new stuff, your working memory is taking up a lot of spaces, and it often can feel that it's too much to take in. Now, AI can remove such redundant tasks or irrelevant tasks so that you can focus on the more complex and more critical aspects of your learning. So how do we balance the two? How do we balance AI and human intelligence? First and foremost, find your source of truth. AI is not a source of truth. It is not written by an author. It is not checked by any peers or evaluated. It is a prediction tool. And we cannot trust it as our source of truth. And we need subject matter expertise in order to think critically, to problem solve, to understand the concepts of our programming, to reason through problems, and to actually evaluate the AI. But AI is here to stay. And we do kind of need to learn how to work with it, and especially to learn that shape of the jagged frontier. We need to know and to feel and to experience what we can ask the AI and what we cannot ask the AI. But please do this in retrospect if you are learning stuff. Don't use it as your ground knowledge, but ask it later on to step in and give you extra information about whatever you are learning. Because do imagine it as an intern. It is really fast and really eager to please, but also very prone to bending the truth and lie. Then the third step is go Centaur mode. If you are a bit further, you know the shape of the jagged frontier, you can give AI deliberate tasks. And what that could look like is, for example, you take your study material, you are going to dive in, and then you're going to ask AI to give you examples on that, or to elaborate further on certain topics that you find difficult to grasp yet. Then you're going to practice. You're going to practice by yourself because you want to make certain mistakes. You want to get the code through your fingers, to understand the concepts yourself. And only if you're finished, either because you're completely stuck and you have tried everything else yet, or because you're actually satisfied with code, then you invite AI to the table to either help you get untangled or to give you new suggestions and new perspectives on the code that you just written. And you can even ask the AI to grade your performance and to give it suggestions on how to continue with which materials to continue next. So the last research for this talk is a research conducted with first-year students of the study computer science. And they gave half of the students, they gave access to a code generation tool called Codex, and the other half of the students couldn't use any code generation tools. Now the outcomes were stunning. The first one is maybe not that stunning, like we can see that the people who use Codex are much faster and more performant. But if we look at the first research with closing the gap, that's kind of predicted, right? Like people who are lower performant, if you use AI, you will on the short term become more performant. But what is interesting is that if they needed to execute certain tasks manually, that both groups scored equally high, even though they hadn't access to AI. And even more stunning is that a few weeks after the course, they did a retention test to see how much of the course and the semester sticked out. And then they found that the Codex users did slightly better, not scientifically better, but slightly better than the people who didn't have access to AI. Now, this does show that if you know how to use it, if you're not falling asleep at the wheel, you take control and you use AI as a tool, it can benefit. But there's a big responsibility for the user themselves. So what would I like you to take away from this talk? Well, don't fall asleep at the wheel. Stay awake. Find your source of truth Find your source of truth, which is not the AI assistant. Then use AI as a tutor who can help you structurize, to give you suggestions and new perspectives on your current thinking. And do mind that a tutor will never give you the answers right away. You first need to try it out yourself. With that being said, those were my sources, and I would really like it to invite you to rate my talk. I can only learn from that, so please do. And if you have any questions, find me on LinkedIn. I think we had some Slido questions, but my time is up. So I'm going to see what the questions were, and maybe I'm going to answer them on LinkedIn, or you can find me in the hallways. I love to have a chat about this topic. I really think it's interesting and to hear all of your opinions. So thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.